welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by a prolific writer, and a writer who is here to discuss one particular novel that had me absolutely captivated. Just a couple weeks ago, I read it in one really intense day, and it was such a wild ride. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Mary G. Thompson, and the book is called One Level Down. It's about a woman who lives in a simulated universe, which she knows she's 58 years old, but she's forced to look and act like she's 5 by her father, who controls the parameters of her program.
I am so fascinated by her situation and her perspective on this incredibly dystopian world that she lives in. Before we get to the book itself, I'd love to ask you about your career and your journey as a writer. Yeah, when did you start writing? And tell us a little bit about your previous books.
Oh my gosh. I would say I got serious about writing probably about 2007, and I managed to sell my first book in 2010 and it came out in 2012. So that's the timeline of publishing. I published a few middle grade fantasy and sci-fi, a teen fantasy, Flicker and Mist, and a couple teen contemporary novels. Most recently, The Word, which is about a girl who's escaping from an abusive father who's in a cult. That's a contemporary thriller.
I'm really curious about what it's like writing for different age audiences. You've written, as you said, for middle grade, for YA, and for adults in a novel form. You've also written short stories. Um, do your experiences writing for younger readers influence your approach to writing sci-fi for adults, or were there new challenges or tools that that helped you out in this new venture?
Yeah, I mean, there's the difference between YA and adult. There's definitely a different style, tone, and content. But I would say the biggest thing I learned from writing YA is you learn to world build very slowly in a small amount of words. And so obviously this book, One Level Down, it's a novella, so it's very short, and you have to do the world building very sparsely, or with as few words as possible. I don't know if sparse is the right word. It's all there, but it's in fewer words than, say, if it was an epic fantasy novel, right? So that's one thing that I learned from doing young adult, is that they really teach you how to write shorter. And also, I think the perspective of, say, writing in the first person present tense and getting that emotionality and immediacy that you have in YA, especially with the YA contemporary. I used that in the sci-fi, and that was really helpful because with my YA contemporary, I really get deep into the psychology of the character that way. And so then in One Level Down, of course, the psychology of the character is much different, being that she's a different age, and she's in a very different situation with the simulation scenario. But I still was able to get deep into her psychology using those tools.
Oh, very nice. That's really interesting. And I wonder if writing for middle grade, when you first meet Ella, she is in a group of children where she has to pretend that she is 5 despite being 58. Did that help you capture children's voices? Because there's such a lovely contrast between, the actual 5-year-olds and Ella struggling to, not struggling, she's good at it, but, pretending to be 5.
Yeah, I mean, she's definitely struggling a little bit. There's one character who seems to recognize that she's a little bit different. Yeah, I mean, the middle grade characters that I've written are 12, right? So they weren't really 5-year-olds. So I'm not really sure. I just think writing for the different age levels has helped me kind of try to imagine the experience of the different age levels. So maybe that helped.
Interesting. And likewise for your law librarian career, does your work shape how you approach research or writing?
I don't know about the law librarian career so much, but I was thinking about this, when practicing law, going to law school and practicing law prior to becoming a law librarian. It certainly teaches you how to be diligent and work on a project. And that's invaluable. And as a writer, sometimes people have trouble getting started and doing their work and setting a schedule. And I don't really have trouble with that. And I think that has something to do with my history as an attorney. I I even like bill my time when I'm doing my work so that I keep track of how much time I work. I'm billing to nobody, right? But I just keep track of it because it helps me to feel like I was productive and to feel guilty if I didn't do it, whatever.
That's a very cool system. I appreciate that. Back to the novella. What was the inception point for it? Was it a particular character or a bit of world building, a mood or a vibe?
This story, it kind of took a roundabout route. I initially was thinking about a colony planet where things went wrong, and so they uploaded themselves. And originally, I was thinking about the person on the outside who would have to maintain it. So I wrote this story from the perspective of Nicholas, the technician. So having read the book, who I'm talking about. And so it was like a 10,000 word story that I wrote from his perspective, and he's coming from outside and he meets Ella and has to decide whether or not he's going to help her. And so, in the novella version, I wrote it from Ella's perspective, whereby she wants him to help her. And you see the situation from her perspective. And both perspectives are interesting. I think I could have written something longer from Nicholas's perspective too, but Ella is the person who's in the worst situation, right? So to me, ultimately, she was the character who I identified with more, and I thought readers would probably identify with more. And so I got to explore different aspects of the world and the characters by doing that. I guess the lesson for writers is like, I personally, a lot of my stuff goes through a ton of iterations. And I would say, like, advice, don't be afraid to do that. I certainly like to do that. And yeah, but it all started with the kernel of the idea of the colonists who would rather upload themselves than deal with the problems that they were having in their colony.
Wow, interesting. And I imagine, writing the story from Nicholas's perspective, like that does give you like that can actually serve as pre-writing for your next draft, because you've done a lot of character work with Nicholas and you know how he's going to fit into the story. And so, speaking of character, though, I'd love to talk more about Ella. She's so compelling and complex, and she provides a really interesting lens on this world, Bella Inizio. So I'm curious about like how do character and world building work together for you if they do, because her perspective and the world are just so, to me, interlinked.
Yeah, they're definitely interlinked. And I always this is a little bit different than sometimes because sometimes I really do just start with that one character and then the whole world is built around them. But because I had already started with Nicholas's perspective, I had built a substantial amount of the world by the time I got to her perspective. But then from Nicholas's perspective, we did not see all of the stuff that was going on in the colony. And so that all grew up around Ella. And then you take her situation and think about the implications of that for the technology that they're using and how the limitations of her parameters. Daddy doesn't have access to all of her parameters. He has seemingly godlike powers, but only over certain things. And so I had to develop all the limits of that and how that would work into the ultimate question for Ella of whether and how she would be able to get out of the situation that she's in.
Mm. Her relationship with her father, who is the tyrant of the simulated world, is disturbing, complex, like all sorts of things. Could you talk about building him as a character? Because I feel like he's very, needless to say, timely, and like speaks to a lot of really interesting issues.
Yeah, I try when I write a villainous character, I do try to make them complex and kind of give them a reason for what they're doing. And so Daddy, I don't really think it's too much of a spoiler to say that he has lost his daughter, and so he's created Ella to not grow because he sort of in his mind thinks that he's helping, I guess. But he's obviously a very selfish person, but we do learn that he's suffered losses in the past that he's trying to avoid suffering those losses again. But one of the things about people who are villainous in real life too, I think, is that people have sometimes we ascribe to them sort of like a robotic facade as if they don't have any feelings. But I think that they just maybe don't have empathy, but they have feelings and they have motivations. And so that's what I was trying to convey with Daddy is that he has all the reasons for the things that he's doing. He just doesn't care as much as hopefully you or I would about the effect that it's having on others.
Absolutely. Yeah, because villains don't know that they are villains, like they are the good guys in their head. So
Right. Right. I mean, for the most part, yeah,
yeah.
I think that's true.
You know, Ella's journey is about self-actualization in a lot of ways and sort of waking up from this like fascistic system that she's in and from complacency with the system that just seems all powerful. There's also to me like a lot of parallels to the journey of an abuse survivor and given the dynamic, with her father, I think that's absolutely comes into play. Did you think about that in terms of crafting her, both her character and her arc?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not sure how much I explicitly thought about it, but that's definitely a theme like throughout my body of work.
Mm.
I have two contemporary novels which deal with that. Amy Chelsea, Stacey D, which deals with two girls who are kidnapped in long-term kidnapping, and The Word, which is about a girl who is escaping from an abusive father and the cult situation that they're in. And so both of those books are about girls who are going through the journey of escaping from an abuse situation, both physically and psychologically. And so that's always been something that I've really been interested in. And so I think I kind of took that theme with Ella and, reworked it into the sci-fi scenario, which none of us are ever going to be in this scenario, presumably, but I think we could all empathize because there is a similarity to other abuse situations whereby there's this whole universe and multiverse of simulations that people can create in this world, but it doesn't help if you're stuck inside it and somebody else is the one that created it. So there's multiverse of extreme freedom where people can create anything they want, and then there's the people that are created that are stuck. And so I feel like there's a lot of parallels to real life with that, and that so all the wonderful things that we have in our world, and not everybody's able to take advantage of them. So I felt like that was the realism portion of the simulation scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And, unfortunately for Ella, she's experiencing both like sort of interpersonal abuse in the relationship with daddy, and also like the systemic abuse that this sort of world is based on about like living in a world where like, anything can change at any moment. You really don't have all that much actual power. That brings me to questions about like the role of technology, technological innovation, and complacency, and how that plays into the sort of tyrannical system that they're in. Um, you know, ha I spent a lot of time thinking about the way that this tech and maybe tech in our world, some of it anyway, lets us imagine or think that we are connecting to people while actually isolating us. Um, yeah, I lost the question in there, but but
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things I was thinking about with this technology is like, I guess what I had just said about how some people are the creators and others are stuck, but also just the lack of imagination that some of the people have in this world. And you get this. I think I was able to get this in a little bit in this world, but what it was from Nicholas's perspective, there's even more of this where he's thinking about the other people that have created simulations and what they've created, and you can create anything, you can create almost anything, you can change the laws of physics, but the people of Melanesia have created something that's very similar to the colony that they were in. Right? And they've improved things to a certain extent by making that they can't age past their 30s. They can't but they do feel pain, although it may not be quite as much pain as we feel, but it's still if I was creating a simulation, maybe I would create one without pain, right? So there's a lack of imagination, and I just feel like the point is kind of that in our world we also have the ability to create our world, right? And maybe we could have a little bit more imagination. But I think a lot of people don't. And I even put this, if you read my afterward, it's like, well, I'm the sci-fi writer and I still like eat the same thing for breakfast every day, right? I mean, I'm not super imaginative in the way I go about my life. And in fact, I can't be, because I have to be disciplined enough to sit down and write the book every weekend, right? And I just think that we could just think outside the box a little bit more and think about what we're creating in our world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think like if you put it in the terms of like being stuck inside like a dissociation machine, like that feels very relatable to me because I have a little electronic in my pocket that like absolutely sucks up my attention span and doesn't make me very imaginative at times if I'm really stuck inside of it. So, yeah, I just thought it was so interesting and it says so many interesting things about our relationship to technology, what it is like to live inside oppressive systems and toxic relationships. And yeah, I had just a really great time reading it. Thanks so much for coming by and talking about it with us.
Thank you. It was really fun.
What's next for you? Is there anything on your horizon right now?
Well, I have another sci-fi slash horror book coming next year from Tachyon, and working title right now is Precious Children. It's about rich parents who have cloned children, but one of them keeps dying. They keep uploading his memories into a new clone, but the children have secrets of their own and stuff going on that the parents don't know about. So yeah, that's coming next year.
Very nice. I'm very excited to read that too. All right. Thanks again. I really appreciated this.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, now it's your turn. Please check out One Level Down. When you hear this, it's out now, I believe, and it will definitely be out when you hear this. So check it out at your favorite bookstore or library website, wherever you like to go for books. Do you have a place you like to send people for books?
Oh gosh, I mean, I live in Washington D.C., so I live right near Politics and Prose bookstore. Obviously anywhere books are sold.
Yes, cool. All right, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.